Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I hope you've been enjoying the conference so far. We're really happy that you're here with us today. And this panel is panel number 2, Peer Interventions to Support Recovery. So my name is Sara Rosenberg, and I will be moderating the panel as a volunteer for Emotions Matter. While I'm doing the introductions, we invite you to write in the chat where you're joining us from today. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. Welcome, everybody. I will now go ahead and introduce our first speaker, our first panelist here. So Jay Cavanagh is a queer first-generation doctoral student in sociology at the University of Calgary. His research currently focuses on the sensory politics of borderline personality disorder, examining how people living with the diagnosis make sense of and experience the borderline. Jay is also a cast member of the BPD Bunch, a podcast founded by Zami Stavert that platforms lived experience voices in support of people living with symptoms of BPD. Jay, we're so excited to have you. Take it away.
Okay, let me share my screen here. Can somebody just indicate to me whether or not you can see this?
Looks good.
Looks
Okay.
good.
Perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm super excited to be here. Grateful to Emotions Matter for giving me this opportunity. Although it's a very short presentation, this presentation is just going to touch on aspects of my personal journey and how that relates up with peer work that I've been engaged in, with a particular emphasis on the role of community for me as somebody in functional recovery from BPD. I was diagnosed with BPD in January 2020, midway through a very significant period of ongoing crisis. I just moved to Canada from the UK to start an MA at the University of Toronto, a month after turning 21, and I was already struggling very significantly with symptoms of depression. When I first received this diagnosis, my main objective was really just staying afloat. Making it to the University of Toronto had been a goal of mine for over 5 years by this point. My family had spent a small fortune on getting me here. I felt an ongoing sense of pressure all the time that often left me feeling like I was constantly letting somebody down by being in crisis. This, coupled with the pandemic, really hindered my capacity to search for community at the time that I needed it the most. Nonetheless, I graduated with my MA in 2020 and then moved to Brazil to live with my then partner, working as a teacher for an international school. It wasn't until I moved to Brazil that I started to feel very seen. Living in Brazil, highly dysregulated, trying to make a relationship work, and at the time not being able to speak Portuguese, community was still pretty hard to find. Fortunately, I found a DBT therapist who spoke English. As part of my process, we began working with something called a therapeutic companion. A therapeutic companion in this context was somebody with lived experience navigating the borderline who still identified as being in active recovery, that voluntarily provided support and guidance during the day to day. We would check in with one another, share stories, share constructive thoughts on how I could make a specific situation better. I started to then see also what the borderline offers us, not just what it takes away. Our love, our compassion, our genuine drive to relate and connect with one another. These are all things that I cherish unreservedly. And so my first personal engagement with peer support systems was pretty much instrumental in shaping how I perceived and experienced the borderline. Before this, I often said in therapy, I cannot see myself making it to 25. I just can't. Well, I'm currently 2.5 months away from turning 25, and life is definitely worth living. As our current world moves in many ways towards the devaluation of those attributes that I mentioned before, I have often thought more deeply about how I could contribute to reinforcing them, almost like an act of resistance. One way in which I do so is through my work with the BPD Bunch, a podcast by and for people, a video podcast, sorry, by and for people with symptoms of borderline personality disorder. I joined the podcast in December 2022 for season 2. To date, I've featured in episodes that deal with several issues ranging from how we navigate BPD and friendships through to decision making and disclosure. When we think about how valuable work like this is, I think it's useful to remind ourselves about the various ways in which people with BPD are still systemically shut out of care. In Canada, most up-to-date credible research corroborates that we have approximately one evidence-based practitioner for every several thousand patients. The podcast then provides a lifeline to those struggling without the resources that many of us have likely been able to access during our recovery journeys. It indicates to the viewer that they are not alone and that recovery is possible even without access to these services, and it achieves this by centering lived experience voices. On an individual level, being part of the BPD bunch has allowed me to meet and interact with honestly the most genuinely soulful and talented group of people in the world who have all experienced the complexities that living with BPD can bring. This term in particular, life has been a bit messy for me. I lost somebody very significant to me in December, and since then, things have been quite unbalanced. For the first time, I felt like I had a group of people who just got it, who wouldn't turn me away if I asked for support, and sure enough, this proved true. For so many of us, life on the borderline feels, or can feel, destined to be lonely and isolated. It can feel like it's constantly showing us that we are the missing link. We are the ones that don't fit. But among others, the BPD bunch proves every day that there is an entire vibrant community out there fighting with you. At times, despite the progress that I have made in my own journey towards recovery, even I lose sight of that, particularly during periods of significant interpersonal and relationship instability. When I did experience stigma from while I did experience stigma from clinical settings, I actually found that I was more heavily stigmatized by the academy. My experiences were treated as inconveniences and used as indicators of how reliable or unreliable I was, how worthy or unworthy I was of a place in a program, how successful or unsuccessful I was likely to be. So it became really important to me to consider how I might tackle this. I see this area as pretty multidimensional. Being a PhD student means that I have multiple ways to change the conversation, and not all of those are through scholarly writing and research. If we take the scholarship aspect first, however, before applying to a again, I made the decision to be part of the change that we need to see through the work that I do. For me, this in part means that I am totally uncompromising about the role lived experience and community based research must play in the thesis that I plan to write over the coming 3 years. Even when advised to avoid being too forthcoming about my lived experience because of how that could impact things beyond my control, such as scholarship awards, I remained uncompromising, and this year I was awarded a $20,000 scholarship for my thesis plans as they currently stand by staying true to this messaging. When I first went into crisis, the academic terrain compounded everything I felt and often made it worse. So I also used my position to speak on BPD and lived experience in academic settings. One example is a guest lecture that I provided to a class of over 200 undergraduates last term. This was such a valuable and wholesome experience that led to several messages of gratitude from the class, expressions of interest, and even disclosures of shared experiences from students. I was able to connect with a lecture theatre full of students, use my position in a PhD program and as their TA for this course to make mental health voices more visible, particularly those living with BPD. These kinds of interactions for me are at the heart of why I chose to go back to school, even though it contributed so violently to my struggles just a few years earlier. And in a way, that's what I take away from peer work. Being part of the change that you want to see, building relationships, helping the community to be more seen and heard. I cannot, of course, represent all perspectives or lived experiences of BPD as a white, gay, cisgender male who has been educated in the Northern Hemisphere at European or North American schools, but I can play a voice play a part in voicing my perspective in addition to making space for the full range of experiences through the work I do, and I intend to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay, for sharing your story. That was so powerful and so beautifully said. Really, really appreciate that. Now we're going to move ahead to our next panel, Alyssa Gross. So Alyssa is a BPD peer support group facilitator and consultant for Emotions Matter, is on the Lived Experience Committee for NEA BPD, has been on the social media committee for DBT LBC, and has an Instagram account, blog, and a new podcast, all by the same name called DBT Exchange. She has dedicated the past 4 years of her life to healing and is committed to supporting others as they do the same to build lives worth living. Alyssa?
Thank you so much, Sarah, who also happens to be my amazing co-facilitator. So it's so great to be in this space with you. And I recognize so many of the names from the groups, and it's so fantastic to have so many of you here today. So thank you to Emotions Matter for asking me to speak. And here is a bit about my story. 4.5 years ago, I received a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, BPD, at a treatment center in sunny California. I would love to say that I had a touch of BPD traits or a dash of BPD symptoms, but I was more like a full-blown borderline with an acute presentation of all 9 symptoms, which for anyone who has lived experience with BPD, there's really not too much more that needs to be said to understand how truly miserable things were for me at that time. The program director who delivered the BPD diagnosis handed me the DBT, Dialectical Behavior Therapy workbook, and said, "This is your cure." Those words were engraved in my mind, and I gripped onto that book for dear life, grateful that there was something, anything that could help me from the pain and suffering that I was experiencing. And while evidence-based treatments, whether DBT or another treatment, have played a crucial role in my recovery, they aren't the whole picture. There are a number of moving parts and elements that go into recovery and building a life that's perceived as worth living. For me, one of those holistic elements of recovery has been to become a BPD peer support group facilitator with Emotions Matter.
Alyssa, I just want to stop you. I see your screen, but apparently in the comments, people are not seeing your screen. I'm not sure why that is.
Screen, but they're not seeing my face?
Your face. If anybody in the group, oh, your video is not off. Screen share is not.
I was able
better?
to see you. I can see you, Alyssa.
We can see you, but nobody else can see her. I'm not sure why that is. I really have no idea.
I could see her as well, but I couldn't. I don't know if you were sharing any slides or anything. I couldn't see those.
No. Okay. I mean, I don't know if there's anything we can do. So I guess we
Alyssa,
can just
at this point, just keep talking. Yeah.
All right. Sounds good. You know, these things happen. I always tell facilitators things will happen and you just kind of roll with it. And I guess, you know, my talk is going to be more of a podcast today. So, you know, that's how we'll roll. So let me pick up where I left off. For me, one of the holistic elements of recovery has been to become a BPD peer support group facilitator with Emotions Matter. In September of 2021, I was in a training cohort of 4 people with lived experience. We received 8 hours of training with personalized time, attention, and support given along the way. As we began facilitating our first groups, there were experienced group facilitators behind the scenes to mentor and guide us. My co-facilitator and I were both pretty intuitive to the process, and we had a great time facilitating together. Additionally, by offering to sub for groups when needed, I was able to meet other facilitators, people who were married, going back to school for social work, and living their lives all with BPD. Prior to becoming a facilitator, I didn't really have the language skills necessary for the validation portion of the groups. Participants will share what's most vulnerable in their lives, and as facilitators, we model responding in a supportive fashion. Growing up, I learned quite a bit about self-invalidation and self-criticism, but not a ton about compassion, kindness, and encouragement. Gaining experience with and cultivating those qualities has demonstrated to me that it's possible to become more of the person you decide to be. Getting involved with the community from several vantage points, whether with loved ones of people with BPD or the clinicians who treat us, has taken my life from survival to a sense of thriving. I am on the Lived Experience Committee for the National Education Alliance for Borderline Personality Disorder, NEA-BPD, have been on the Social Media Committee for the DBT Linehan Board of Certification, have created BPD memes for my Instagram account, DBT Exchange, and have written about my journey on a blog by the same name. And as of February, I began working as a consultant for Emotions Matter to mentor and train new facilitators. Viktor Frankl, a Jewish psychiatrist who survived the Holocaust and wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, said, "There is nothing in the world, I venture to say, that would so effectively help one to survive even the worst conditions as the knowledge that there is a meaning in one's life." Additionally, he said, "In some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds meaning." For so long, I was in need of support, but now I also get to find the meaning and sense of purpose that Viktor Frankl is discussing. As facilitators, we hold space for participants, encourage their steps towards recovery, have compassion for challenges faced, and keep us all moving forward collectively. There are days that I show up even when shit hits the fan, pardon my French, or when your camera doesn't work, because I know that there are people who rely on these groups and, like myself, never fail to leave feeling better than when we arrived, which is one of the reasons why we have grown from serving 61 people in 2019 to over 1,000 people last year. In these groups, you all offer so much inspiration. I see you showing up again and again, a week after an attempt, being vulnerable, reaching out, getting back on the horse. You know that having a favorite person doesn't make you a stalker, that needing to take time off from work for your mental health doesn't diminish your worth, and needing to learn how to engage in healthy relationships doesn't mean that you're any less worthy of that love. As my peers with lived experience, you have taught me how to offer grace to other participants when a relationship implodes again. You might be crying, but will also be the first person to offer a kind word to another participant that's struggling. You might feel alone and ashamed, but will flash a million heart emojis and head nods on the screen for another participant. Stigma is inconsequential to my self-image because I know you, our peers in the BPD community, and we're beautiful. Thank you so much for letting me share today, and I do apologize for the camera glitch.
Thank you, Alyssa. I'm really disappointed that we couldn't see your face. I mean, we can see you backstage, but if you start your camera again, like stop and start, you can see your face. But it was a wonderful, wonderful talk. Thank you so much, Alyssa. And as a personal friend, we, like Alyssa said, we facilitate the groups together, and Alyssa is so wonderful. So thank you, Alyssa. Next up, we have Oliver MacDonald. So Oliver has lived experience with BPD and is on the board of Emotions Matter, involved in development and fundraising, back-end event support, and is a lead facilitator with our men's support group. He is from Guelph, Ontario, Canada, and is married with a 6-year-old son. He is currently working for the province of Ontario. Oliver, go ahead.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Perfect. Just do a quick audio check. So I just wanted to start by saying thank you to my fellow panelists here. I know as somebody with lived experience, presenting can be very overwhelming, and any technical glitches or things like that can, can definitely throw us off. And I drew such strength from watching us navigate that last moment there. So thanks everyone for your patience and understanding. Um, so my name's Oliver MacDonald. I'm from Guelph, Ontario, Canada, like Sarah said. I am, I think to really help start this off, I want to share a little bit of context on my story. So I was diagnosed in February 2021 with BPD, PTSD, and severe substance use disorder were my three primary diagnoses, with a few concurrents on top of some significant health challenges such as chronic obstructive pulmonary disorder and a short stint with a very severe little piece of skin cancer. And it all hit me at the same time. I went off work on a short-term leave, and it was through that leave and the evaluations that I was able to really get myself much better understood. And it was then that I really discovered that I was born with and lived with borderline personality my whole life. So, uh, it was symptomatically brought on by a major life event. 7 years earlier to my diagnosis, I lost my father to, he took his own life on Christmas Day, and he suffered from mental health and severe alcoholism. And I hadn't seen him for over 10 years. And when I found out, it was, needless to say, significantly destabilizing in my life. And that's really when things started to go downwards for about 7 years until I got to the point of going off work and then being diagnosed. So it was then that I found myself in my greatest distraught, as we all know. And Alyssa, acute acute is a great way of putting it. And I was showing, all 9 symptoms extremely acutely, to great concern of my, the hospitals and such. So getting help was important for me, but unfortunately, the only help that was offered was some medication and a recommendation to DBT. And whether that's the only recommendation or not, I can't say, but that's what my healthcare team was suggesting that I do to navigate this period of time. And in Guelph, where I'm from, there's a 2.5 year waiting list for the current DBT program offered by our mental health association. And unfortunately, my wife is a frontline employee of that association, and I was deemed a conflict of interest to some degree to prevent me from utilizing some of those services, such as the DBT program. So I was with nothing. And being told that was all I had was a big blow. So I started to look for help, found Emotions Matter. They directed me to a 12-step program. And it was through the combination of the 12-step program where I met a man, and they suggested a man to me. There's multiple women and others in the program of who identify multiple ways. But I met this gentleman, and he, to this day, remembers me every day. And our time was solely spent on a 12-step program, not mental health related. But he showed me that connecting with another man in that way was an incredible and powerful thing. And to me, that was my first introduction to, I guess, what a peer intervention to support recovery could be. So from there, I, a public servant, lived to serve. Through my recovery, I found that I joined BPD Fest 2 years ago, 3 years ago now, 2 years ago, and met all of the people here again. And it was that community that really made me feel complete, because my portion of my recovery only handled that. But Emotions Matter and the community of people that are impacted by BPD truly understand me. And I think that understand me word is something that resonates very deeply with many. So how I've tried to help and support that is by working with Emotions Matter as a volunteer. Came forward, offered to support them in any way I could as a volunteer, and being a man with lived experience in BPD who also is comfortable with public speaking to some degree, I just was very persistent at supporting Emotions Matter and helping develop the new men's program that we've come out with. It's a closed men's group to specifically offer an opportunity for men to connect who have lived experience and with BPD, and it's been life-changing for me. And I've found that, leading with lived experience has been a time that's come up, or a phrase that's come up, and it really resonates because I may not be fully recovered or ever fully recover in the way that I identify and relate to that, but I know that I can help others who may not be as far along in their journey as me, simply by showing up and being willing to share what I've lived through without giving advice or just support and life experience. And it was those discussions that really helped me realize that there's people that have made it farther than me, that gave me hope, that taught me to help others. And Emotions Matter and the community and everyone that joins us has really continued to drive that for me. And I think that's really been a fundamental way for me to try and connect as a peer and make an impact as a peer. And as you can see from the other panelists here, we're all doing it in our own way in small branches. And what I think that really shows on a whole is that despite the best work that Emotions Matter can do and the other organizations can do, there's so much more and so many more people that just can't be reached or are harder to reach. And maybe a peer in a local area who's been through some lived experience can help others by learning from some of us and others that have established a peer-based community or some way to support this. And I hope that that truly does make a difference in bettering anyone's life that's impacted by borderline personality disorder. And that's really what I wanted to come today and share. And I hope to see you all year after year here at this event. See you at our walk coming up in June, and continue to build the community that we have. And then hopefully we'll see you guys in your little pockets doing your own things and sharing those stories with us and others and building strength in numbers. So thank you very much, and I'll turn it back over to Sara.
Oliver, wow, thank you so much. That was incredible. And Oliver and I work together very closely on the board, and it's just absolutely a pleasure working with Oliver. And it's so great that you were able to join us today. Thank you so much. And we will continue on to our next and last panelist, Baylie McKnight. So Baylie is a registered social worker and the co-founder and president of the Borderline Personality Disorder Society of British Columbia and the clinical lead of the Baylie co-founded the BPD Society of BC in 2012 after recognizing the huge gaps in service and stigma surrounding BPD as a person with lived experience. Baylie has over 15 years of experience working in the human services field in different capacities, including outreach, nonprofits, private practice, and health authorities. Baylie, go ahead.
Great. Yeah, thank you so much for welcoming me into this space. So a little bit about my BPD journey. I was diagnosed probably about 17 years ago now when I was 18, but I really started showing symptoms of BPD around the age of 11. And I wish I had got the diagnosis sooner. I feel like I would have gotten the proper treatment and support that I needed. I was really struggling at a young age, and with like peer friendships, romantic relationships throughout my adolescence. I was running away. I live in British Columbia, so I was near to the downtown east side. I was running away, 11, 12 years old. Just a lot of the common symptoms of BPD, fear of abandonment, self-injury, substance use. And when I did get diagnosed at 18, I had the privilege of going to a private outpatient center for a year and did dialectical behavioral therapy for a year. And then I went on to do another evidence-based program, which was the STEPS program. And then I realized that there was huge gaps in service for folks living with BPD. And I thought, why don't I create it myself? So that's what I did with other like-minded individuals living with the diagnosis and loved ones. And so we first started out with peer support groups, a small peer support group within Victoria. And then we expanded throughout British Columbia to Vancouver, New West, Vernon. And now we also do a hybrid model virtually also. And it was really kind of like this passion and a little bit of rage because I was just so sad to see that there was huge stigma and gaps revolving around BPD. And I really just wanted to see more services, more awareness, less stigma around BPD. And then we noticed also that we were filling part of the continuum of care, but also there was not enough treatment. So a couple years ago, we decided to start a DBT program, affordable, accessible DBT. And so we've been running that for we started near the beginning of the pandemic, so a couple of years now. And we've been doing that also throughout British Columbia. And that has the element of peer aspects to it. I am a DBT therapist. I got my master's in clinical social work and have been comprehensively trained in DBT, but also the people who run the program are also people living with BPD and have gone through DBT themselves, so we can give back to the community. And so this is what I do. I live and breathe BPD and DBT, and I couldn't do it without a huge team of volunteers. And that's our society is peer-based, volunteer-run, and I just love what I do. And I don't know, I think that's kind of just like it in a nutshell, I guess. So thank you very much for listening to my story. And thanks so much.
Baylie, thank you so much. That was amazing. So appreciate you sharing and all the wonderful things that you do for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have one question I want to go around and ask everybody. And I want to remind the audience that we do have a Q&A tab on the left-hand side panel. And you can go ahead and put in any questions in there, and I will read them out loud and have the panelists answer them. So I'm going to start with Jay. Hey again. If you had any advice for our audience, what would it be?
Oh my gosh. We're starting real light there. I might need
we can come back to you.
Yeah.
Let's come back to you. Let's move on to Alyssa, and you guys can write in the chat if you can see Alyssa now, because she went out and came back in, so hopefully it fixed it and you can see her lovely face. Alyssa, go ahead.
So I love that you asked that question, and I think I'm going to give the answer that I really need to hear today, which is take it moment by moment, one moment at a time. I know we can be in pain and suffering, and we want to get better quicker and have the life that we want to live and have a life that's worth living, and that makes so much sense, and I'm right there with you. If I can somehow trick myself into realizing I can only live this one moment at a time, this one breath at a time, that would really save me so much pain. And there's so much hope to be found in this moment, because it's in this one moment that we can make our lives better.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alyssa. So apparently they cannot see your screen.
Okay.
So you guys are going to have to come to some other programs or walk to see Alyssa live. But for now, we'll move ahead to Oliver. Oliver, what advice would you give our audience?
That's such a great question. Like, I think at the end of the day, advice is it's a word that I've been very afraid of through all of this because I never really appreciate getting advice. You know, I sometimes find it hard because it leaves me feeling not very understood at times unless it's from somebody that's been through what I've been through. So I think on that note, what I would share through my experience has been I found it much more beneficial to share my pain with people who understood and try to avoid sharing my pain with people who didn't as much as possible. So what I mean is, when I was first, diagnosed, I was very raw. Trying to help people understand how I felt was very difficult for a few people, like my mother, right? Until she understood more about my disorder, took the time to research, bring herself up to speed, I couldn't really share the same honesty and depth. Now, if I have a conversation with her, it's much different and I feel much better and we have less conflict after that. So sharing with people who understand early in your journey was something that was very good for me. I learned it late, but looking back, I wish I did it earlier. And really, truly connecting with community. Even if you don't know if you have a diagnosis, get in a room with people who might and see if it works. You'll know where home is home, despite what some medical person says, in my opinion. And that's how I felt. That's why I ended up where I ended up and can't leave. I just can't leave this community because I don't feel like that anywhere else. So that's what I would leave with the group. And I'm not sure if it works for all, but for me, that was the most powerful next to anything else that's been suggested or tried.
Great. Thank you so much, Oliver. I want to turn it over to Baylie for some last minute advice. We do have about 6 minutes after this that we can go through some Q&A that I see is coming in. So Baylie, what advice would you give the audience?
Yeah, find your community. Like, I have gotten so much hope and validation and strength and even skills from people in the support group that that we've offered, or just even throughout your community. Finding people that have shared lived experience is so powerful, and people, even if there's just like that moment of like silence or gap, and I get like nervous as a support group facilitator, and then it's just amazing the amount of wisdom and strength that people have to offer in the room, and then it's just like all that anxiety eases because people are just filled with so much wisdom that they have to offer. And the stigma that sometimes that we can find within medical communities and stuff, like the people in the room just truly understand each other, and that there really is a lot of hope and help out there, and that people with BPD can be in functional recovery. Like, that is such a myth. So I just wanted to like offer that as a piece, too. Thanks.
Thank you, Baylie. So appreciate that. Jay, did you want to add something?
Sure. So I have like two small pieces of advice. The first thing is, don't feel that you have to wait for some structured program or therapist to start a recovery journey, right? A recovery is however you define it on your own terms and what works for you. And there are people on the BPD bunch even that have gone through those recovery processes in their own ways, without those kinds of support systems in place. The other thing that I just wanted to say, because I just realized as well, like, I'm somebody that's in like an academic program, and this is something that doesn't often get talked about. If you're somebody with BPD and you're like having difficulty in academia, as many of us tend to, do your research hard on who you're going to work with, and always stick to your guns and what it is that you want to do and why you're doing it, and don't sacrifice that for anyone or anything.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jay. We have a few questions. I don't think we're going to get to all of them. So we'll try to answer you privately, but in case we don't get to answer your question, please email us at info@emotionsmatterbpd.org, and we will definitely get back to you. I'm going to go ahead and read a question here real quick. I hear that becoming DBT certified is a long process. I have heard of patients and therapists using DBT workbooks and going through it together, even without official DBT certification. This helps increase accessibility for clients who cannot afford or get into a DBT group. What do you think of that creative approach? Who wants to take that? Baylie, maybe? Do you have an answer?
Can you repeat the last part?
Yeah, so they were asking, what do you think of this creative approach of not getting officially certified as a DBT therapist, but just going through the books together, and it gives access to clients who can't afford it?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So I'm not a certified DBT therapist. It is very expensive and a lengthy process. I have the 5-day intensive training. I always recommend that people go to somebody who has extensive training. I think there's like, if you think of like the middle path, I think maybe there's a middle path. So that's what I would always suggest. I mean, that's what the evidence shows. But again, like if you're thinking of it from like a peer-based perspective, there's also peer-based programs out there, like people with lived experience providing DBT. There's always those options too that are potentially more affordable. I think it depends on what your goal is in the end, how severe the BPD symptoms are too. Like I think it really depends on the individual also. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. So just to wrap up, I want to thank everybody for sharing. Thank you for your questions. If you have a question, you could also connect with the presenters in this conference by clicking on the conference attendees button that's in the green bar at the left-hand side of the panel. There are also resources which are downloadable links that are related to this topic at the bottom of the screen. And one last thing, I'm going to share my screen again. So we are having, like we mentioned, a walk for BPD. It's going to be hybrid and in person. We're going to have it in New York City at Hudson River Park, and you can join us virtually, walk in your own community. We also really would like for you guys to donate if you're enjoying this program. We do offer this for free, so we need our community to support us. You can see here the link, emotionsmatterbpd.org/donate now. And there is a big donate button on the green tab on the left-hand side. Again, if anybody has any questions that hasn't gotten answered, please email us at info@emotionsmatterbpd. And thank you, everybody, for being with us. We hope the rest of the day, the rest of the conference, and thank you so much for coming. Bye-bye.